Good day, everybody. Zack here, and welcome to another episode of Daily Rider. Our guest today is the KTM 390 Adventure R. That is a 400cc single-cylinder engine tucked into a chassis with lots of adventurous styling and electronics and components, all for sale for about $7,000. I would go so far as to say that on paper, this is the machine that everyone so desperately wished KTM would release in the first place, tall and rugged and ready for adventure. But here's the thing, the landscape of motorcycling has changed, right? There are bikes for sale now that this machine has never had to compete with before. So I suppose the ultimate question goes something like this. Is this new 390 Adventure R improved enough to still have a foothold in the market in 2025? Or is it just too little too late? Let's ride to work and I'll tell you what I've learned. All right. Alrighty, before we get going here on this 390 Adventure R Daily Rider, a quick reminder that this video is brought to you by none other than RevZilla. Not just the YouTube channel that you're watching, of course, first and foremost an e-commerce platform. The way RevZilla makes money, it sells parts and accessories for you and your motorcycle. And a little bit of that money goes into making videos like this, or the shop manual with Ari Henning, the High Side Low Side podcast, or a CTXP adventure. So the next time you need something for you and your bike, whether it's a skid plate or tires or helmet or a jacket or a cover or aftermarket mirrors or whatever the heck, just know that a little bit of the money you spend will go into making programming like this. In the meantime, thanks very much for watching. Okie doke, everybody. We've got a 399cc single cylinder engine under there with a little bit of dirt on it from riding this sucker in the dirt. This is a shared engine across the 390 platforms, which now includes this 390 Adventure R, the slightly lower spec 390 Adventure X, the Enduro R, the SMC R, and the Duke, all under the 390 banner. So it is a pretty widely used engine. We'll talk more about how it works in practice as we ride, of course. There are a number of things I would like to call out on this bike, some of which are really important because they set it apart from the other 390 machines. You've got your WP Apex 43mm upside down fork, which is adjustable. You've got WP shock in the back, a linkageless setup that we'll talk a little bit more about later. You have an 18-inch rear wheel and a 21-inch front, and all of that means that this bike is significantly taller and ostensibly more rugged than the Adventure X, and indeed much more so than the previous 390 Adventure iterations. I suppose we could take one step back and point out that the frame, swing arm, subframe, basically the whole chassis is new and updated. Some of the stuff like the engine and pieces of the powertrain have come from the 390 Duke, which was updated last year for the 2024 model year. 2025 sees updates to this bike and the family of slightly more extreme offshoots of the 390 Duke. Maybe the thing that I found most interesting was the foot pegs were moved down and farther forward compared to the last 390 Adventure, because that was feedback the KTM got, that it felt too much like a street bike and not enough like an adventure bike. You can see the foot pegs are, nice and spiky and adventurous, which is something that people who like this kind of bike are always calling for. This bike also has an IMU, or inertial measurement unit, somewhere in here, where is it, up here or down here? I don't even know where it is. But that allows it to have lean angle sensitive ABS and traction control and stuff like that, which the other siblings in this line do not have. So this is sort of the premium off-road offering with the most features and the most technology in the KTM's 2025 390 lineup. It also gets updated styling, of course. Most noticeable, I think, is this sort of like rally style tower at the front with the dash mounted pretty high, and this really flat windscreen and LED lighting with the sort of LED surrounds around the headlight, LED blinkers and taillight as well. Yeah, I think that might be just about it for the sort of basic updates I want to talk about in the parking lot anyway. We can fire up this TFT, and yeah, I know the side stand is, yeah, I know the, and we can fire this bad boy up. Baka, 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 baka. There it goes. Little 400cc thumper rattling around in there. Interesting, I think you see the pipe does not have a classic muffler anymore, right? Like no muffler that comes up. The muffler is not high mounted. It doesn't go around the side of the engine. It basically goes under, sort of street bikey look to it, right? And you can see it has this big red box under here that is doing all the muffling so that it doesn't have a classic muffler. KTM claims that this update saved a bunch of weight. I forget, 4 pounds? Well, it was a lot, or significant, I should say. Gives the bike a clean look, though you could argue that it's not very adventurous to have the pipe running down underneath like that, I suppose. All right, everybody, I think we might be ready to ride, right? We can flick up this kickstand, and actually, this is something I want to call it right now, just before I forget. The kickstand, see how far it sticks out from the side of the bike? When I'm riding in the off-road section and standing up a little bit, I might tell you that the heel of your boot can hit the kickstand a little bit, and that's an inelegant thing to happen, I think. The other thing about the kickstand that cracks me up is that when you put it down, the passenger peg comes down every time, unless you do it sort of like gently. Well, even then, it's a weird little quirk. Not sure what's going on there. Anyway, I digress. Let's get to riding, shall we? And away we go. A little adventure to work. All right, now that we're rolling, we can talk about some specifics on the specs. Let's see where to start. 3.7 gallons of gas, and when it was full, weighed in on the daily rider scales at 391 pounds. I'll add a little bit of perspective to that later, but that is pretty light for this class of bike, I would say. Seat height 34.2 inches, which means at 6'2" I can sort of barely flat foot with both feet. So it feels pretty tall, despite being pretty narrow in the middle. It's sort of like tall for a street bike, but low for a dirt bike, which is a hint at this bike's kind of ethos and other ways that it delivers performance. On the topic of performance, it is rated at 45 horsepower, I think, or something like that. And the price I mentioned is $7,000 MSRP, though I feel the need to point out that on the KTM site right now, as of the recording of this video, there is also an import duty listed at $700, so 10% of MSRP, which brings the MSRP up, of course, $7,700, which is, closer to $8,000 than $7,000, and maybe starts to feel a little disingenuous to claim that it's a $7,000 bike when I'm not really sure how often that tax will be levied on you, the consumer, but something I thought was kind of interesting. As for what it feels like to sit on, really nice ergonomic package, at least right off the bat. It feels open and upright and comfortable in a way that an adventure bike should, I think. The handlebar feels appropriately wide and close enough to the rider that you don't have to lean forward to get to it. It really feels like the seating and riding position of a larger motorcycle, except that it's quite narrow between the rider's knees. It feels small, almost sort of dirt bike or dual sport, at least narrow between the knees, which is an interesting combination of feelings, and I think appropriate for the bike, and in general, nicely done, nicely executed. As we merge out onto the freeway here, this is where I sometimes boast about roll-on power for bikes. I'm going to experiment with this bike. I think it might be good to do a top gear roll-on, so you're going 4,500 RPM. There's about half max revs. We're going 50. I'll roll the throttle wide open, and we'll give it a minute here to climb up to 70, 75. As you can see, plenty of power to carry 75, 80 miles an hour down the highway, but it is limited by being a 400cc single. I don't think you should expect this bike to be fast, but you can expect it to be fully capable of riding like this. On that topic, another thing I really like is the wind protection. It doesn't work out all that well for me, maybe at my height, or maybe it's the helmet I'm wearing, though I did experiment with a few different helmets. It's a little bit loud around my helmet, and if I stand up, you might feel it gets a little bit quieter. Did it get any quieter? It's quieter for me anyway. So if I sit in my natural position, it's a little loud. If I stand up, it's a little quieter. If I go like this, it's even quieter. But in general, I really like the windshield and the wind protection. I think it does a great job pushing most of the air away from your upper body in general. And I rode this bike for hours on end on the freeway, and never once was I kind of like sad about the position I was sitting in or the amount of wind I was getting hit with. If I were to lodge one complaint, it would be about the seat. It just feels a little thin to me. Like when I stand next to the bike and push my thumb into it, it doesn't seem that bad. It seems like reasonable, and I think the shape is pretty good actually. But after about 30 minutes, or definitely after an hour, I was tired of sitting in the seat. Like, my buns were burning a little bit, and I found myself standing up and stretching my legs, and I just didn't really like it. Now, you might have a different experience. You might be lighter than I am, shorter than I am. Perhaps your buns in the seat will make for better mates. But I think that this is a classic problem that a bike like this is bound to face, which is that it's supposed to be tall and rugged, but it's also supposed to be small and approachable. I can just see the conversation inside KTM happening, like, well, we want the seat to be low. We don't want the seat height to be 36 inches like some dual sport or something like that, because it's going to scare people away. But we also want it to be somewhat comfortable. I guess where I'm going with this is, if you're an experienced or confident rider and you buy this bike, you're almost certainly going to want a seat that's flatter and thicker, because you're going to want the feel of a taller, flatter seat off-road, and you're going to want the padding when you ride down the freeway. Is that going to make the wind protection a little bit less comprehensive? Yes. Is it going to be worth it for you? I think so. If I were going to lodge 2 complaints, the second complaint would be about the vibes from the engine. It's not oppressive, it's not a huge deal, but the foot pegs do vibrate pretty noticeably, and the handlebar, you do get some vibes through the handlebar. It wasn't something that I found unnerving or distracting when I was riding the bike, but I'll tell you that I spent about an hour and a half on the freeway at one point, and then I pulled off to get gas, and my hands, when I would touch them to things, were doing the thing where it felt like you just touched an electric fence or something like that. They were like tingling in sort of a weird way. So I think that that's an uphill battle for an engine like this, to just go 70, 75, 80 miles an hour on a freeway for a long period of time. It's not really what an engine like this is designed to do. I think that KTM has done a pretty good job controlling the vibes and making it work well as a street engine. It is, after all, the same engine from a Duke 390, but it's something I felt the need to call out, because even though it's an inherent design headwind, it's notable, I think. On to fuel mileage and range. The fuel mileage I found to be quite varied depending on the type of riding I was doing. All the riding I did was sort of mixed between highway, city, and off-road. One tank of gas I did was much more measured highway. I was sort of stuck in traffic on the highway, much more 55, 60 mile an hour riding. The other tank of gas was much more riding off-road and riding on the freeway at sustained 75 miles an hour. The lowest number I ever got was 44, I believe, miles per gallon, and the highest I saw was 55. I bet you could, you know, pull 70 miles a gallon out of this thing if you rode it really, really politely, and I bet you could get 25 miles per gallon if you were in first gear in the mud all day long. So it's just going to depend a lot on the type of riding you do, which I know is an obvious thing to say, but with a bike like this, it's worth pointing out because it is capable of so many different types of riding. I suppose all that is to say, 3.7 gallons of gas, you're going to go 150, 160 miles and probably need to fill up. I often say on this program that 200 miles is my basement for acceptability of an adventure bike. With a small adventure bike, I suppose I can look the other way, though I gotta ask, why not 4.5 gallons on this bike? Why not? Makes it too heavy? Maybe. I don't like that excuse though. Into the Round Town Challenge. Before we do our attempted footless stops and talk about manners in urban and suburban areas, I should say that the mirrors are pretty good. A little buzzy on the highway, I meant to point that out, but they're set out in the right spot, they're sturdy, and I think they were pretty well thought out. So kudos to KTM for that. Ooh, good footless stop right off the bat, everybody. All right, attempt number 2. Let's see how this goes compared to attempt number 1. Ooh, also pretty good. And I think that's kind of fair, because this bike, while it is tall, it is quite light, and the handlebar is wide, and it's designed to be, in one manner or another, kind of predictable and communicative and easy to use at low speed, whether you're off-road or on-road. So I think, oops, I screwed that one up. But I think whether you're around town or you're, you know, picking your way down a single track trail, it's supposed to be agile and intuitive, and I definitely find that to be the case. The height is one thing that if you're a shorter rider, of course, you'll struggle with a little bit more. But in general, I think the weight of the bike and the way it carries itself is going to be pretty easy for most riders to handle around town. One thing I do not like is the throttle response and engine characteristic. I complained about this on KTM's 390 Duke when I reviewed that bike last year, and same goes here. I just think that this engine and its fueling and some amount of the characteristic of the power plant just has an odd feeling to it. It doesn't feel like it makes power in a real linear way, and it feels, the ride-by-wire feels kind of disconnected from what you get sometimes. You sort of twist the grip expecting something and you get like plus or minus 5%, it feels like, and you just, I don't know, I find it consistently noticeable, and that's an odd thing in this day and age. I actually prefer the off-road throttle response. I know we're not talking about the dash quite yet, but we're just going to do a quick jump in here. I'm going to go to ride mode, configure street. Oh, that's right. In street mode, you can't configure the throttle map, annoyingly. So you have to go to off-road riding mode. There's also rain, for what it's worth. Go configure off-road, and then you can, shut off traction control, quick shifter. There it is. Throttle resp. So the rain mode dumbs it down a lot. You can do street, or you can do off-road riding throttle response, rather. And I find that to be, oh, there's also a display mode thing here. You can put it in like ultra simple. Here, I'll show you what that looks like. Oh, geez. No, it's time to ride already. Here's the old ultra simple dash mode. Just shows you gear position and speed and a couple other pieces of information. Kind of cool. Okay, we're back to standard dash mode. I didn't mean to get too distracted there, sorry about that. But now we're in off-road mode, and I like this throttle response a little bit better. It's more responsive. Now, if you're a bleeding heart fan of Daily Rider, you'll remember that I am not a fan of ultra responsive throttle modes. I don't necessarily like it when the throttle is just like really jumpy and it's just like too snappy, and it makes it feel too frenetic. In this case, I find the street riding throttle map to be just kind of a little too dull, and I like the off-road one. It just feels like it suits the engine, because the engine's personality is a little bit kind of like flighty and nervous and kind of like blah, and so I always want to be able to give it revs with a slight flick of the wrist. So I like that. I prefer this riding mode. On to Lover's Lane, everybody. And I'll slide myself back onto the passenger seat just for a second here. And I'll say that it's not particularly wide or grandiose or accommodating in any way that you wouldn't expect, but I do find the passenger perch to be pretty soft. And I think passengers will be fairly happy, though they probably wish for a little bit more legroom. This is one of those bikes that's hard to tell, right? Do you expect people to take it on multi-thousand-mile journeys? I mean, theoretically, right? It's an adventure bike. You're going to be able to get aluminum bags for it and kit it all the way out. And, do you want to do that with 40-something horsepower? You certainly could. It's not like it's too small. I do think it'll feel a little sluggish with two people and a bunch of luggage on it, but I reckon it can be done. And I like to think that the passenger with the stock saddle anyway will be relatively happy. Okie dokie, into the Twisty Road section. And I would say that it really just depends on your expectations of the 390 Adventure R, how good or bad this bike is. In some ways, it performs exactly like I would expect a small adventure bike to perform. It feels neutral on the side of the tire, it tips into corners real easily, it's light to the touch, it's fun, it has a whiff of sort of on-road performance about it. And in other ways, the suspension feels maybe a little bit over-damped and slightly kind of off-roady and jittery in situations like this. It's certainly good enough to have a blast on Twisty Mountain Road, but just keep in mind that it's a fairly spindly street bike. It's not quite a dirt bike, but it is tall and narrow, and it's going to behave differently than a more street-oriented ADV, or obviously a street bike in particular. I think tires will make a big difference. I mean, tires always make a big difference, but this bike's tires are Midas Trail something or other, and they're a pretty middle-of-the-road compromise for a small ADV like this. I don't think that they're bad or dangerous or anything like that, but I did have a couple weird scenarios where I lost traction and thought that it wasn't really fair for me to be sliding at that particular moment. They were sort of fine off-road. They just seemed like a little bit bulky. If I were to talk to an owner of a 390 Adventure R in the future, I would ask what tires they're running, and I'd suggest that you experiment with some stuff that is based more on the type of riding that you do, whether that's more on the dirt or more on the pavement, because I think you might find some joy in different rubber. Right, and down out of the twisty roads, back to surface streets. You can do a little acceleration test here. Put it in second gear and open the throttle. There we go. Nice smooth shifts. New quick shifter. It's definitely happiest when you rev it up. it's not altogether bad. It's just a pretty one-dimensional engine. You rev it up to get more power, and you suffer the consequences if you don't. And beyond that, it doesn't really offer a ton of charm, I don't think. Right, our favorite red light to talk about: brakes. Let's jump on those binders. Ugh. Pretty good brakes. It takes a pretty sizable pull to get the bike to do stopping, but it's sort of decent sized caliper. It's actually a pretty big rotor. It's a 320 mil rotor. It just looks kind of small because it's on a big wheel. Braided steel lines and a pretty big rotor, and it's adjustable levers both sides, by the way. It's not top of the line equipment, but it is following the basic guidelines for good componentry, like the braid lines and the big rotor and stuff like that. Works pretty well. All right, let's ride. All right, coming up to another red light. We've already talked about brakes. I suppose we could do one more little spin through the dash and point out that there is phone connectivity, as you can see here. I have my, let's see, audio. No, I'm not playing anything, so it's not working. But you can turn the volume up and down with the buttons on the keypad here. You can see who's calling on the bottom of the dash here when your phone rings. It's showing me how much service I have, what the battery life of my phone is, showing me that my phone did not charge last night, which is really cute, and that I have a headset connected. It's not a bad Bluetooth connectivity situation. I don't think it's trying to do too much. You know, that's the thing that really bugs me, is when companies try to build in more technology than you're going to get by just mounting your phone to the handlebar. This seems like a pretty good use of smartphone and dashboard synergy. Like, it's showing you a little bit of information, and it'll help you live your life if you want to listen to music or something like that, but it's not going to try to it's not going to try to do too much and then fail, which is my least favorite thing these days. I'm not sure you can hear the radiator fan, but it's down there running. The coolant temp ostensibly on the dash is listed as OK, but you can see down here it's showing actual coolant temp, which is at around 200 right now. Radiator fan kicked on when it was at 210 or something like that. Another thing I'd like to point out is that when I was riding this bike for, I don't know, I'd been riding for 2 or 3 hours at that point, and I looked down and this said low. Like, it said coolant temp was low. And I thought, low? That's weird. And then I checked the temp and it was down below 150. I think it was 148 or 150 something. That's a weird thing to see. It's not really like a problem necessarily. It sort of reminds me of, like, I don't know, like if you were in the back seat of a cab and the cab driver was like, hey, did you know you can turn right on red? I'd sort of be like, I don't feel like I'm in danger, but I have questions. Like, have you done this before? I'm worried that you don't have that information. And that's how I feel about this thermostat. I'm kind of like, I'm not saying that it's a problem that the temperature goes from 145 all the way to 220 during the course of one ride, but I do know that's harder on the engine. And I'm sort of looking at the thermostat thinking, have you done this before? Why is this so hard for you? I don't understand. And that's a good segue into the engine discussion, which we often have in this part of the ride. Would I buy this bike just for the engine? No. The engine's my least favorite part. I don't like the engine. It beats walking, yes, but I just find it to be a little bit disconnected at the grip. Like I told you in the Round Town Challenge, it stalls a lot, kind of inexplicably. It seems like something in the marriage of the electronics that control the fuel tuning and stuff like that, and the mechanics of the engine, whether it's a light flywheel or the aggressive cam timing, or I don't really know what. It all feels a little bit synthetic and disjointed, and it doesn't bring me a lot of confidence or a lot of pleasure using it, frankly. And I think that really stands out in this bike, because I think that, you know, aside from the small complaints I had about the seat or the kickstand or stuff like that, I think that the chassis of this bike is really quite good. I think it's quite capable. It looks the part, and it also can handle a good bit of off-road riding. So I just think that the engine works, but overall lets down the whole package. Well, just like that, we're coming to the end of the ride, everybody, and I could circle back to that question I asked in the beginning. Is this bike too little too late, or is it just the right amount at just the right time, or whatever? And I think that I am in general optimistic about this bike. I don't think that it's too little too late. I think, well, let me clarify. I think that it's too late, but I don't think that it's too little. I think that the performance ceiling has been raised a little bit in this particular nook of the small ADV world. I think that other bikes around it have, you know, more cylinders and just as many features and are cheaper, and yet you have dual sports that are less sophisticated and more expensive than this bike. So I think it does a pretty good job walking the line between the two and being a really aggressive small adventure bike, because a lot of them tend to lean into the sort of beginner feel or beginner market, and this suits the brand. It suits KTM to have a bike like this that is a little bit high strung, that's a little bit aggressive, it's a little bit tall, and it's just a little bit lighter and faster than other stuff around it. Ultimately, I just like that it's unapologetic. Basically, I think that too often motorcycles pander to so many audiences that it gets lost and you sort of can't tell what it's supposed to be. But this bike really does have a clear personality and a clear vision for itself. Installed. It's a clear vision for itself that includes stalling. But what I was saying, what I was trying to do is compliment you and say that it has a purpose and a feel, and I like that. And if it's not for you, then it's not for you, but it is what it is. Okay, all that is to say, we're finally into the off-road section. Okay, so let's just start off with rain mode. Oh, rain has the simplistic dash layout, which is kind of cool, and a dumbed down throttle response, and I think traction control that is a little bit more conservative. Yeah, quite conservative, right? You can see me like trying to slide here, and it just like nips everything in the bud, which is fair enough. But let's see how much more lenient street is. I'm not actually sure. I have ABS off in rear in street mode. What am I doing here? Anyway, okay, street mode. Yeah, I mean, that's like surprisingly lenient TC, I think, for street mode. Whoa, lost the front. You can get a little bit sideways. It's kind of cool. Anyone want a old sedan? It's over here if you want it. Let's go off-road mode, and we'll experiment with off-road traction control, which is, in my experience, quite lenient and a lot of fun. Yeah, I mean, like, you can actually get sideways a little bit here. Let's do a little donut, or, you know, oh, I lost the front again. Well, here we go. Look at us sliding around. Wow, I lost it. Okay. Point is, that's with off-road traction control on. It'll let you slide around and get kind of crazy, which is cool. And again, suits the bike, suits the brand, suits the purpose and mentality of this machine, which I think is kind of fun. And I will tell you that this thing is a hoot off-road. You can ride it just about like a dual sport. You know, that's kind of how it feels between your legs, and it's how it feels on a dirt road. It feels like a big, heavy dual sport dirt bike rather than a street bike that you can kind of ride off-road, which I think is appropriate. Okay, we're gonna go back to street mode, which, you know, like I said, I don't like the throttle response as much in street, but we got traction control turned off now, which I didn't really feel the need to do. We're in the dirt because, you know, off-road mode's so loose. Let's see if we can get a wheelie out of this sucker, huh? Second gear? I don't know about second gear. Let's try that. Whoa! Whoa! That was a pretty good wheelie. If I had just done a better job with keeping it up, we would have got up to 4th or 5th gear. Nice job, little guy. Yeah. Second gear wheelie. Okay. So, you know, it's kind of high strung, and I sometimes wish it had 38 horsepower instead of 45, and the engine was just more predictable and usable, but more power is more power. All right, last test, of course. Can you back it in? And KTM being KTM, yeah, you can shut off for your ABS. That was juicy, everybody. At the end of the day, this bike provides adjustability that it should for this, you know, purpose of riding and that kind of thing. It's fairly sophisticated, and I like that. It ought to do pretty well in the old U-turn challenge, I think, everybody. Oh, look at all these spaces we got. We're not going to need all these spaces. This sucker's going to crush the U-turn challenge. Let's do, we got more space over there, but I'm going to give us 2 spaces. That's how confident I am. 2 parking spaces. And, oh, I screwed up. Okay. We're going to go feet up, full lock left. Yes. Well within 2 parking spaces. 1.8, 1.9. I feel pretty good about that. This is one of the things about adventure bikes, you know? They work well in a variety of places, and that's why they're so gosh darn likable. Oh, did you want the passenger foot peg down? Don't worry. Let's see if we can get it to go back up. Oh, almost. Okay, that's enough of that. Radiator fan's on. My radiator fan's on. I'm running hot. Let's listen to this sucker one more time. Does nothing for me. Sounds like a high performance showing machine, if you ask me. But did the trick. I had fun. We got to work, yeah? But as usual, enough about me. Let's see what you all have to say about this sucker. I want to answer some of your questions you posted on the social medias. All right, here we go. First question comes from Danger Dinkles, who says, is this a good bike for someone with zero off-road experience to start off-road riding? And I know it can kind of seem that way, right? Because this is the sort of like smallest version of an adventure motorcycle, premium as it is within its own lineup. But no, I don't think so. I find the powertrain difficult to use, as I said. Don't like the engine, don't like the fueling, don't like the tuning, and it's fairly tall, though it is light. There are certainly worse motorcycles you could start off-road riding with, but if you're a complete newbie, I would start with something that is less ready to race. You know, honestly, I'd start with something that is lower seat height. I'd start with something that has a sort of more predictable old school power plant, and you know, I just don't think that you're going to take advantage of or need or appreciate, if you're not into off-road riding already, some of the features and performance aspects that this bike delivers. Next question is from Max Vassar, who says, what's the difference between a small CC ADV and a dual sport? How does it shape up to Suzuki's DRZ 400? So good question about dual sport versus ADV, right? Because I said this kind of feels like a big dirt bike, right? And it does. I stand by that. It almost feels like a less sophisticated, less powerful version of KTM's own like 690 Enduro or something like that, which is lighter and more powerful and arguably more capable, but also quite a bit more expensive. So it's sort of in that vein. It's kind of in the middle. It's certainly based on a street bike, right? Street bike engine, but it's leaning pretty hard into being tall and narrow and dual sporty. This is a bike that embodies the modern sort of movement in motorcycling, which is to bridge these gaps that we've often seen, right? 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I think it was very easy to tell the difference between an adventure bike and an off-road bike. You can just tell the difference when you look at them. There weren't a lot of bikes that were in the middle. But now that gap is really being bridged by bikes like this. To answer your question, what's the difference? It's all about the bike's purpose and aura. This is clearly trying to be an adventure bike, right? The tall windscreen, the highway manners. It's not that a DRZ will necessarily go places that this won't, or vice versa. It's just which one is going to be more comfortable in which environment, and which one will attract the type of rider that wants to use it for its specific purpose. Can you put saddlebags and a windscreen on a DRZ and turn it into a little ADV bike? 100%. Could you take the windshield off this and just ride it as a dual sport on single track all day long and be perfectly happy? Yeah, probably. It's in the wrist of the beholder, if you will. Next question is from Cool Bad Axe, who says, if it was your money and you wanted a new small ADV in 2025, would you choose this KTM 390 Adventure over a CF Moto Ibex 450 or a Royal Enfield Himalayan 450? I'm assuming Himalayan 450 is what you meant. Good question. Well, a couple things I'd like to point out. One, this bike, 391 pounds on our scales. Ibex 450, 425 on our scales, I think. And Himalayan 450, like, what was that, 440? 450? Something. It was a lot heavier. This bike is more performance oriented. It's taller and leaner and meaner than those bikes. To answer your question, if I wanted a new small ADV in 2025, I would get an Ibex 450, because I think that the ways in which this bike, this KTM 390 Adventure R, is better than the Ibex 450 wouldn't really serve me in what I would want to do with the bike, if that makes sense. Is this more capable off-road? Maybe, but the places that I went on an Ibex 450 and I had fun jumping it over water bars and ripping down dirt roads and picking my way down single track trails, it was enough for me. It was sort of like, it was fine. This bike is more capable in the dirt, certainly, yes, but I eventually did the same thing I did in the Ibex, which is I jumped it and the shock was overwhelmed and it bottomed out. And I thought, like, well, you know, I'm not really getting a dirt bike with this. I'm just getting a little bit more dirt bike, which I don't think would help me enough. At the end of the day, I think this bike is, let's say, 8 ounces better as a dirt bike and 3 or 4 pounds worse as a street bike. And so I would just sort of go the other way with the Ibex. All right, last question here from Much Ado About Everything. And they ask, if motorcycles were pocket knives, would this be a survival knife, Leatherman, Swiss Army knife? What kind of knife would it be? Well, I'll be the first to tell you that I'm not a knife aficionado. So I probably shouldn't be talking very much about knives. What would this bike be? I guess it would be a Swiss Army knife of sorts. You know, honestly, it reminds me of the type of knife that someone carries that it doesn't have, you know, multiple blades. It's not fancy. It's just an everyday knife. You clip to your belt, you whip it out, it opens easily. It's got a nice sharp enough blade that it does the trick. It's made of sturdy materials. It works well. It's not impressive to people that don't know knives, but if you took it to a group of people that do know knives, they would be like, huh, good choice. Good choice. Respect for choosing that knife. And I think that's kind of what this bike is. It's not probably as versatile as you want it to be, but the things it does well, it does quite well. And the things that it doesn't do well, it still holds its own. In some ways, I think it's designed to be attractive and sort of like raise the eyebrows of people who are in the ADV world, even if they're not going to buy this bike. They sort of look at it and think, nice, respect. And so to bring it back to my initial question, I do think that this is the bike that everyone expected from KTM when they announced a 390 Adventure 5, 6, 8 years ago now. And I'm glad that it finally exists. All right, everybody, stick with me. Let's put this sucker on the Daily Rider leaderboard, shall we? Come on.
All right, everybody. Here we are inside RevZilla West and at the Daily Rider leaderboards. We've got a KTM 390 Adventure R ready to go on the board. The R is important. Remember, there's an Adventure X, completely different bike. Lower seat, different wheels, different suspension, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, now's the time I remind you of a couple of important things. One, there's a link in the description of this video to the article that I wrote. Worked really hard on it. Thanks for asking. It does also have a bunch of other stuff, information, data on changes that were made to the bikes, explained a little bit more clearly and succinctly, as well as more evidence and opinions of me riding it in the dirt. So please do click away and read up if you're interested in more information on this bike. Okay, so up on the leaderboard here, we do have that CF Moto Ibex 450 at the top here, followed by the Husqvarna Svartpillen 801 and Yamaha MT09. And then you get your Himalayan 450 down here, as well as a bunch of other bikes we've ridden in 2025. Where do we think the KTM 390 Adventure R is gonna fall? You can probably already guess it's not gonna dethrone the CF Moto Ibex 450 at the top. The other big question is the Himalayan 450, which is, as I said, a lot heavier and a lot sort of like more mellow and relaxed and so on and so forth than the 390 Adventure. And I think that if it were my money, I would choose a 390 Adventure R over a Himalayan 450. I like the aggression. I guess I would tolerate the stalling and the massive coolant temperature swings and the kind of jittery engine that I don't always trust, because I think that as a package it's quite impressive. And you know, I'm getting a little older, but I'm not old enough that I'm ready to kind of give up on the idea that I want to tackle a dirt road or a trail or that kind of thing. So I like that aspect of the bike. However, as an overall ranking, I'm struggling to put the 390 Adventure R above the Himalayan. Maybe it's what you want. Maybe you're looking at the 390 Adventure R and you're like, of course it's better than a Himalayan 450. A Himalayan 450 is kind of slow and heavy, and you know, it's not really the adventure bike that I imagine myself adventuring on. And that's totally fine. But I don't think the Himalayan 450, for all of its faults in weight and potential faults in attitude, if that's how you feel, are enough to make it worse as a daily rider. I think if you want to go have an adventure, this bike will take you to just about all the places that a KTM 390 Adventure will take you. And I think that is the really salient point here. And if you're going to ride to work every day, or you're going to ride across a country or a county or a city, I just don't see the KTM 390 Adventure R delivering something that the Himalayan doesn't, aside from being light and tall and narrow and aggressive. Those things could be useful to you, and they are cool, undeniably. but I don't think it makes it a better daily rider. And so part of me struggles with the idea of ranking the 390 Adventure R below a Yamaha MT-09 in some ways, because I'm sort of like, it's so versatile and ready and kind of like gnarly and cool and capable and blah, blah, blah. But I think if I just close my eyes and take a deep breath and try to push out the emotions that I feel about these bikes and think about what they actually do for a rider, for you or anyone else, this is how I feel. I think this is fair. And I guess if you don't agree, I hope you at least see where I'm coming from. That's all I got for you. I told you about the article. We had a great ride. We had fun. We did a donut. We did a wheelie. We did all the things we're supposed to do. And this is the part where I just hope that you had fun and hope you learned something and hope to see you next time. Later, everybody.
God damn it. Always stalling. Okie dokie, into the Twisty Road.